that name is a yoga, something yoga. So does anyone know what is the 6th chapter? Dhyana yoga. And what does dhyana mean? Meditation? Concentration? Yeah. Anyone else? Any other words? Meditation, concentration. What else might we say? Any Hindi speakers? Hindi is your mother tongue? Yes? So in Hindi, when someone says dhyan, what are they?
Attention. It's attention.
Focus, attention. Yeah. Right? If someone wants to say pay attention, how do they say it in Hindi? Dhyan laga. Dhyan se. Right? They say like that. When I was growing up, so I'm also from a Hindi-speaking background. Of course, born and raised in America, so the kind of in-between, little bit of the Indian influence, American influence, both. So when I was growing up, I would often hear this, especially from my father. My father would always be on my case. Like he said, he'd always be on my case. And this word that he would use, he would always say, dhyan, dhyan, dhyan. And so in my mind, dhyan became like a very negative thing. Isn't it? Right? Sometimes we have that experience. If someone is really putting a lot of pressure on us, we feel like it's so. This idea that sometimes it's like, and especially because I still am, but sometimes some of us, we like have that absent-minded type of personality. So it was very difficult for me when I was growing up, because I was always very, kind of, it was very difficult for me to focus in one place. But I would always get this, dhyan lagao, dhyan lagao, dhyan se. So I want to look at this idea of dhyan, and I want to reflect on how this particular verse from the Gita helps to define and redefine dhyan for us. I'm not going to ask you, but because it's very personal, but for some of us, I know that, I'm 90% sure that there's at least one other person in this temple room right now who, like me, also has some kind of negative association. So maybe, if not negative association, at least it's something that feels very, maybe intimidating, right? This idea of dhyan, focus, meditation, concentration, attention. And there are others who are like, this is like, music to your ears, because we have these different personalities. So the Gita also, in the 6th chapter, Sri Krishna Bhagavan, he addresses dhyan in a way that at times feels really, really intimidating, overwhelming. In fact, so much so that, as we'll talk about, Arjuna himself says, like, Krishna, this sounds really too heavy for me. I can do a lot of things. You've seen me do a lot of things. But what you're describing, I don't think I can do that. But in other ways, what Krishna does in the 6th chapter is he redefines dhyan in a way that very much connects to the idea, the core principles of bhakti. I can't see the screen, so someone has to tell me if something's going wrong with the screen. Please tell me.
It looks good.
It's okay right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No.
Now it's back to normal. No.
Okay, I need to advance my slides, but every time I try to do that,
Try hitting
it goes out of the slide. Oh, I know what's wrong. Sorry.
in the last slide.
I was on the last slide, on the first slide. Okay. So this is the verse. I'm going to read out the Sanskrit, and in the interest of time, I'll just read the Sanskrit, and maybe someone else can read the English. Yathadipo nivatasto nengate sopama smrita yogino yatachittasya yunjato yogam atmanaha. Someone like to read the English out
As
loud,
a
please?
lamp in the windless place does not waver, so does the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady on his meditation on the transcendental self.
Okay. Raise your hand, please, if you're familiar with this shloka. It's not one of the more, I mean, I don't want to say unpopular, right? Because all the verses of the Gita are popular, but this is not generally one that we hear cited so much. Please raise your hand if you're familiar with this shloka. This is one of the many places in the Gita, and we find this a lot in the 6th chapter, but throughout the Gita, where Krishna uses analogies. So what I'd like to do is unpack this analogy a little bit. But before we do that, we're going to read the purport. And this is one of the places in the Gita where Srila Prabhupada has a very short purport. This is the entirety of the purport, believe it or not. It's one sentence. I think it's actually shorter than the verse itself, than the translation of the verse itself. So would someone like to read the purport out loud for us, this one sentence purport?
A truly Krishna conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place.
Okay, so this is Prabhupada's, right? It's one sentence, but there's a lot packed in there. A truly Krishna conscious person. This is one of the places where we can say Srila Prabhupada is defining Krishna consciousness for us. Sometimes we, especially if we've been coming for years, maybe even decades, some of us, we're associating with devotees, we're identifying with ISKCON and this Hare Krishna movement. So we can use a phrase like Krishna consciousness and we just use it without even thinking. What are we actually talking about? What does it mean to be Krishna conscious? So this is one of the places in this one sentence, Srila Prabhupada is defining really nicely for us in a way what it means to, as he says, truly be Krishna conscious. And so one way we can understand what it means to be truly Krishna conscious is that it means to be always absorbed in transcendence, and then Prabhupada further defines it, which means in constant, undisturbed meditation on one's worshipable Lord. This person, Prabhupada says, reflecting on the verse, commenting on the verse, is like a lamp in a windless place. So I want to unpack this analogy. We're going to unpack this analogy in sort of 3 phases. First, we're going to unpack the idea of the lamp. Then we're going to talk about the wind. That's a little bit of a cheat because the verse doesn't actually talk about wind, but it talks about windless. So if there's windless, we can infer that there's something such as wind, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So first the lamp, then the wind, and then finally the windless place. So in this analogy, what is the lamp being compared to? The mind. The mind of who?
Mind of a yogi.
The mind of a yogi, the mind of a transcendentalist. And for us reading it, we can say our minds, right? Sometimes we can read the 6th chapter and we can think, well, that's for like those yogis out there, but I'm not but we're all supposed to be bhakti yogis. So whatever particular yoga path, but this also applies to us. So we, or our minds, we can say, are meant to be like that lamp. And it's a lamp that doesn't waver. If you ever light a little diya and you see, usually what happens with that flame?
Flickers.
It flickers, it moves around, right? Especially during like Kartik time, right? When we offer our lamps, you put the lamps and you see the flame is flickering. But this shloka, this verse, is telling us, or you can say it's directing us towards, we should be that steady that it's like a lamp that doesn't flicker at all. That's completely steady, still, fixed. So when you read a verse like this, it can seem really far from where you are. How many of you feel like on a day-to-day basis, you can honestly say you're like a lamp that doesn't waver, doesn't flicker? Anyone? Okay, forget day-to-day, at least once a week. No?
At times.
At times. So thank you, that's honest, right? At times. We get glimpses of it at times. When do you feel like that? Sorry if it's too personal, but just...
It's not personal. Yeah. Sometimes it could even be when you're talking to somebody very dear to you, or it could even be when you're chanting, just like, very early some days you manage to get up and you're not sleepy and you're well rested and well hydrated and your voice is good.
Everything's lining up,
It could
right?
also happen at work sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. yeah, sometimes it's like that, right? Everything feels like it's really in alignment. Physically, we're feeling pretty good, right? We've gotten enough rest. We've gotten our bodily need, mentally, emotionally, and when we're in those places, or in that state, we can feel like fixed. But for most of us, it seems, we're not feeling that all the time. So we can read a verse like this and we can say, wow, that sounds really impossible, or that sounds really overwhelming or intimidating. I'll never be like that. Yes? And in fact, again, depending on our psychology, some of us read a verse like that and we're like, okay, it's a challenge. We take on the challenge. But some of us read a verse like that and we might even think, okay, I think this spiritual life is not for me. Because if I have to be like this, if I have to be like a fixed lamp that doesn't even, flicker or waver at all, my mind has to be that steady, that fixed. That's far from where I'm at. So I want to just before we move on, I want to just invite some reflection. Do you find this verse inspiring or intimidating? And please be honest, let's be honest. Intimidating. Who said? Someone said so quickly, intimidating. Why?
Because that's a very high standard to achieve.
So when a standard seems really high, right? It's like, the bar is set too high, am I ever going to even make it? Yeah? Others?
Inspiring.
So we had some inspirings down here? Yes.
Because I'm so low.
Because I'm so low.
Yeah.
So similar kind of thing. So the
it's like
goal
the
is so high,
opposite. Yeah.
but then why is that inspiring for you? Why do you feel it's inspiring?
Because I want to be a better person. So it's inspiring to try and be like that.
So on the one hand, I feel very low, the bar is very high, that's intimidating. The flip side of that though is that also inspires me to reach up. Others, intimidating or inspiring, and why?
I think it's inspiring because Krishna is speaking this for all of us, and he would give us, he would give us things that we can reach. Of course, he also gives us the method and the baby steps by which we can reach it. But at least we have a goal to work towards, a clear goal. This is a level of steadiness that we should aspire to. At least we have a goal. So it's nice that we can be inspired because we know what Krishna has given us in the Gita is something that can be done. It's just that we have to have that faith that if you follow the baby steps that he's giving later on, that we could do it.
Thank you. So I'm hearing three things. I just want to try to reflect that. One is that if Krishna's giving it in the Gita, if it's there, that means it can be done. Right? Otherwise, he wouldn't give it to us because he loves us. So he wouldn't give us a goal that can't be attained. So I have to have some faith that it can be done. Another thing that I'm hearing is that it's better to have an aspiration, no matter how far it may feel, than to not have a goal at all, right? If you don't have a goal at all, I can feel pretty comfortable, but then you're kind of aimless. But if I have an aspiration, a goal, no matter how far it is, at least I can keep my eye on that, right? Yeah, I maybe feel very, very low, but someone has set a benchmark for me, so I can keep focused on that. And
Baby steps.
Baby steps is the third one, yes, thank you. And that I can be encouraged that, okay, I've been reading the Gita, I think I figured out Krishna has a little method to this. Whenever he gives a goal, he also gives some baby steps. He never just gives a goal and says, good luck, you're on your own. Right? Thank you. Other insights?
I mean, it's inspirational from the point of view that it's educational. It helps us understand and recognize the attribute that someone needs to cultivate, develop, or helps us recognize when we see someone with those attributes that yes, this is what can be achieved. This is what one of the things that is naturally something that develops in people who follow this process.
Yeah. So it's educational, it's instructive, and it allows us to appreciate and see and build faith when we see others are actually, maybe they're not fully there yet either, but they're on their way. We have models that we can follow. We'll take one or two last ones, especially if anyone has intimidating, because we've been giving a lot of attention to inspiring.
What if it's neither
intimidating or inspiring.
Oh, there's always one out of the box thinker who does this. Yes, tell me.
Yeah, because I'm kind of confused, Prabhuji, because it's sometimes, it's always like, you cannot, even though the goal is, so high and it's inspiring and everything, but we are human beings, and so we tend to have highs and lows and ups and downs. That is life, right? Material.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused when yes, it's high standard, yes, it's intimidating, but also it's confusing now for me because am I not then in the right path, Krishna conscious path, because my mind is not focused, or should I be, or
Yeah. This is great. So is it an either or? Can't it be both? Right? Sometimes the same thing that's intimidating is on some days is inspiring on other days. As we go back and forth, we have highs and lows. And if something becomes so intimidating that we think, well, am I even on the right path then? Do I have to be this before I can, right? Before I can take Krishna consciousness seriously?
Yeah, this is the thing I was thinking, like if a person who cannot even walk and if you tell them to climb Mount Everest, that person will say, no, I don't want to take this. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
therefore it is intimidating sometimes because the meaning of what Prabhupada has written is so high to achieve. And is it possible? I mean,
Yeah. That's a great point, right? It can seem so like
yeah.
talking about baby steps. Like I can't even walk to use that. I can't even walk, and you're talking about scaling the highest mountain. So I think one of the ways that I want to unpack this is I think there's both in this. In the verse itself, especially, if you read it in a certain way, it seems to imply that almost as a prerequisite, we need to control our minds. We need to steady our minds. And that is, in one sense, I don't want to say it's the bad news, but it's a sobering news for us. That if we're thinking somehow I can commit to a spiritual path, spiritual practice, whatever that spiritual path may be, but particularly in terms of Krishna consciousness, in terms of bhakti, if we're thinking that somehow I can do that and I don't have to deal with my flickering mind, we're kidding ourselves. So the sobering sort of message is, yes, this is the aspiration, right? Steadiness through concentration is what we need to work at, even if it's just chipping away at it, even if it's taking those baby steps, even if it's just, okay, let me just, to use your analogy, let me just work on just walking from point A to point B, and then point B to point C, and eventually I'll get to the base of that mountain, and eventually it may take so long, but I will get to that mountain peak, right? But I have to put in that work of steadiness through concentration. But then there's another piece to it, and this is where I think there's something that's deeply inspiring and even hope-giving about this. And it really comes out in that one sentence purport, where Srila Prabhupada refocuses that, yes, it is about steadiness through concentration of the mind, but for a devotee on the path of bhakti, our focus, even more than steadying the mind, yes, we want to steady the mind because that's what's going to help us to be better servants of Krishna, more focused, more conscientious, thoughtful servants of Krishna. But our larger project, as Prabhupada says, is constant, undisturbed meditation on our worshipable Lord. In other words, we can achieve that same kind of steadiness, not just by rigorous tapasya, meditation, concentration, but we can achieve that steadiness through cultivating our relationship with Krishna. The more that we engage in relationship with Krishna, even if we're feeling really far away, even if we're feeling very low, even if we feel like the goal is so high, if we just stick to the relationship and don't get discouraged, if we just think, Krishna wouldn't give me a goal, right, that I couldn't achieve, because he knows me. Those of you who are parents, right, sometimes you may push your children, and your children may be like, no, if I do that, I'll die. But you know, as a parent, You know what they need, how they can be challenged, how can they be pushed, right? You know how much to push them, and you also know that whatever you're going to give them to do is doable, is attainable. And so Krishna, as our ever-loving parent, if he is setting that goal for us, he knows. Not only does he know that we can do it, but he's there to support us. We're not doing it alone. So our energy goes into building that relationship with Krishna. When we build that relationship with Krishna, then we develop a constant undisturbed meditation on Krishna. It may not happen immediately, but gradually, the more we invest in that relationship, the more Krishna becomes just naturally the focal point of everything that we do. When you really love someone, then practically everything else reminds you of that person that you love. You see something nice, you want to connect it to the person, you want to give it to that person. If something funny happens to you during that day, you want to share that humorous, right? Everything reminds you of, connects you to, or becomes an opportunity to share with your beloved. So also, if we can cultivate that relationship, right? We put in the effort to steady our mind through concentration, but also we put in our effort and keep our faith in the relationship. Okay, the second part of the analogy, and we'll have to move a little bit more quickly. The second part of the analogy is wind. Bhatta, wind. So what in this analogy do you think the wind represents?
Disturbances.
Maya, disturbances. What do we mean by Maya? The material? The material world in general, material energy, material influences, desires, disturbances. That's another D word.
Distraction.
Distractions, that's a big one. Distractions, right? Wind is often used that way. In fact, there's another famous verse in the Gita, in the second chapter of the Gita, where Krishna uses wind in a similar way. Does anyone know which verse I'm thinking of?
No, second chapter.
Second chapter.
As the boat is on the
Vayur Navam Imamasi.
Yeah. So there, it's the mind is compared to a very steady boat. But even the most steady boat can be knocked down or taken askew by a powerful wind. And so also, that's how powerful the senses and the sense objects and these distractions and disturbances can be. So these are the winds. How many of us feel those winds? You don't have to. You may not be feeling it exactly at this moment, but throughout our days, our weeks, right? In whatever way. Sometimes for us, it may not be something so external even. It may be even just in our own households, right? We're trying to stay focused on our spiritual practice or spiritual path, but we're just distracted in so many ways. So the wind is going to be there, but that wind is going to look different for each of us. So, again, this is something to silently reflect on. I'm not going to ask you to volunteer, but I want to invite you to reflect on what is the wind in my spiritual life right now? What are that thing or those things that are especially distractions, disturbances, that are especially threatening to make that flame of my lamp flicker, right? Now, why bother doing this? What's the point of cataloging your wind? We all have disturbances. We all have distractions.
So we can overcome whatever the disturbances. If we know it, we work on it.
If you know what a specific problem area is, you can work on it, right? If we're talking in very general terms, sometimes as devotees, I want to challenge us a little bit. Sometimes as devotees, those of us especially who are practicing for many years, maybe we're initiated, second initiated, we can tend to keep things very general, very vague. Sometimes even we go in front of the deities and We can be very, very general. Please, Krishna, help me overcome Maya. But in what particular ways? Right? There's power to specificity. If we can be particular, if we can be specific, again, that doesn't mean we have to disclose it to everyone else. It's not, there's value in maintaining privacy and confidentiality, right? We should, only those fellow devotees that we really trust and we have that kind of relationship, we might reveal our minds to. It's not for everyone. But we should be willing, first and foremost to ourselves, we should be willing to and ready to really take deep inventory of what are the particular challenges that are facing me, what are the particular obstacles, what are the particular disturbances and distractions. Because unless we do that, we're not going to be able to know how to work on them. Does that make sense? When they clear a forest, one of the things that they do is before the crew goes in to chop down the trees to clear the forest, in advance someone goes and marks each tree with an X. That's going to be. So I've heard it said, one of my teachers said like this, that using this analogy, that we can look within our hearts and when we find those anarthas that are particularly those unwanted things, those challenging things, those things that are particularly standing in our way, that are causing a disturbance in our relationship with Krishna or our ability to be absorbed in that Krishna consciousness, then we can just mark them, right? It's not that we know, it's not that, they'll magically go away, but at least we can mark them to say, to show Krishna, look Krishna, I'm serious. I'm recognizing this is a problem. I want to do something about it. I need your help to do something about it. Okay, and now finally we come to, in one sense, my favorite part of the analogy. Nivatasto, a windless place. What does a windless place bring up for you? What do you imagine when I say a windless place?
Peace.
A peaceful place. Other grounding. So I think someone says I couldn't hear them. Vaikuntha. Vaikuntha is a windless place. Is it? I don't know. 2 weeks fall? I don't know. It's a different class.
There's a band called Vaikuntha Breezes, so I don't know if that's...
Oh, that's true. So maybe but even the breezes in Vaikuntha they're not disturbing wind.
But it's not windless.
It's not windless. But yeah, but something where it's
closed room,
peaceful.
Even, yeah.
It's
grounded,
right? A windless place. So one way of understanding, or one way of interpreting this verse of being like a lamp in a windless place, is if the lamp is flickering, if there's lots of wind, what we can do is we can take that lamp and we can physically bring it to a windless place. So how many of you have been to the Govardhan Eco-Village just outside of Mumbai? Yes? Okay, a few of you. Wonderful, wonderful place. So I was at the Eco-Village not too long ago, and I was actually very fortunate to be there for not this last Kartik, but the Kartik before, and I was there on Diwali, on the day of Diwali. It was very, very sweet, wonderful place to be on Diwali. And so practically the whole community was just lit with these oil lamps. And with the lamps, what I found, or when I asked, and they described to me that they figured out that if you place these lamps at certain angles, right? There's so many brilliant engineers at the Eco Village. They're all IIT grads or something. But they figured out that certain angles, right? When you place the lamp against a wall or where two walls meet on a certain ledge, that the lamp will stay lit. And I could see actually those flames were they were practically, at first I thought they were artificial lights. They were so brightly burning and so they weren't flickering at all. And now other lamps, by where the Yamuna is in Govardhan Eco Village, there was a little bit more movement, there was some wind, some breezes blowing, so those flames were flickering, right? So one way of understanding a windless place is we actually find a place that by its very nature, by its very construction, that place is a kind of a place of grounding, of safety, of security, of peacefulness. And we physically move the lamp, or in this case, we move ourselves, our minds, to such places. So for us in our spiritual journeys, in our spiritual lives, using this analogy, I want to ask you, if anyone feels inspired to share, what are some windless places for you that you've discovered in your own spiritual practice, where you just need to, and I hope that question makes sense, right? Where maybe the distractions, the disturbances, the pressures, everything is getting a lot, and you just need to physically move yourself.
Creating a japa room or chanting room, like, a place in the house where just like, focused meditation.
So having like a sacred space within your home, a room, and you don't do anything else in that space.
Yes.
Right? Because sometimes we can have a space, but then we start to get a little bit lax, and I'll also read the newspaper. Okay, it stops having that, right? So a dedicated sacred space, yeah, beautiful. Others?
My kitchen.
Your kitchen. Your kitchen has become that windless place for you. It grounds you, it keeps you. Okay, yeah. So that becomes like a sacred space doesn't always necessarily have to look like an explicitly spiritual or religious place, right? Others.
Early morning walks. Outside.
Early morning walks. I hear, okay, a couple of you. Early morning walks. Yeah, so something about the early morning hours and then walking, being physically outside, that's like your windless place. Even if it's physically windy outside, maybe still. Spiritually, it's windless.
Being outside of the house.
Being outside of the house.
Too much wind in the
So
house.
this is why I said don't volunteer to tell me what your wind is. So based on what your wind is, that'll also help. But sometimes just, all joking aside, right? To get out, because for some of us, the house is filled with so many, right? But to physically remove us, and especially if you're I know many people who's like an outdoorsman. So being outdoors, right? Sometimes that's also, we feel a little bit more connected to Krishna and nature sometimes, or just breathing fresh air, right? Others, I mentioned the Govardhan Eco Village because for me that's one of my windless places. Sometimes I literally mean getting on a plane and going to Vrindavan, going to the Eco Village, going to Mayapur, going to Sri Rangam, going to these holy places, the dhams, the tirthas, yeah? Coming here to a temple, yeah? For some of us, even if it's just once a week, but it's like, you start to feel it by Friday, Saturday, it's like, oh, the winds are strong, you come on Sunday, you get that boost that hopefully carries you through until it's time for next Sunday, right? It's one of the reasons why we have, and Srila Prabhupada's genius in kind of creating the structure of regular temple programs and at least a weekly program, if we can't have a daily program. So again, kind of echoing some of what we've heard, finding windless place could mean temples, coming for the deities, or having sacred space or deity room in our own home. Some we didn't get to talk about, but festivals and holy days can be like that windless place, going outside, visiting the dham. And then something else that we didn't really mention, but again could be very much a part of a windless place, is coming together with other devotees. Right? Other devotees become our windless place. They become like the walls and the angles and the ledges that kind of keep the wind away when we gather together. So even if it's whether it's in a home or going out on a walk together, or going for a picnic, or coming together in a temple program, right? So that's finding a windless place. So that's one way of understanding a windless place. But there's another way of understanding a windless place also. And that's this idea that's represented by this image here. Does anyone know what these are called? These kinds of candles have a specific name.
Hurricane.
Yes, hurricane candles. Why are they called hurricane candles?
Even in a hurricane, it'll still burn, right?
Protecting from the wind.
From the
Yeah, that glass enclosure around the flame protects from the wind. But theoretically, even in a lot of wind or a storm or even a hurricane, which is like in one sense you can say the most extreme form of
wind.
the winds of disturbances that are maybe challenging us, right? That flame stays safe, stays protected. And one of the things I really like about this image, and why I wanted to offer this as a it's not exactly in contradiction to the first way of finding a windless place, but it's, I think, something that complements. Sometimes we find a windless place that requires us to move from point A to point B. But one of the things I really like about this analogy is, where does that glass enclosure go? It goes wherever the candle is, isn't it? It's not dependent on a particular place. So sometimes in our lives, we can and we should take advantage of those opportunities to physically remove ourselves or have a change, whether it's going to a dham, whether it's making it a point to come to the temple, or checking in with a kind of a sangha of other devotees, right? Making those more external changes. But sometimes, in addition to that, we also have to accept the reality that the winds are going to be there. But can we create a windless place for ourselves? Can we create a little like force field for ourselves?
Yes.
Yes? So how are we creating that force field for ourselves? Does anyone want to share? What's your force field? What's your hurricane candle?
Krishna says, we talk with tolerance in the Vedic culture. So Krishna says,
The tiksha, that tolerance. So that can be part of your hurricane candle, is cultivating tolerance, right? Intentionally cultivating tolerance. What else? What are ways that?
We can refocus mentally with windless things. Like, for example, the windless place could be, you don't physically go there, but you just, when you're stressed, when you do, kind of gives you that grounding to imagine something, say Vrindavan, you see in the picture, and you just like, so kind of replace another powerful serene place.
Sometimes we can physically go to the dham, and if we have the opportunity, we should. We shouldn't neglect that. That's also an important part of it's one of the 5 most important angas of bhakti, is actually Mathura Vas, is actually residing in Mathura. But how many of us can reside in Mathura all the time? We can visit Mathura. Mathura here means Mathura, Vrindavan, all dhams. We can visit them, we can make pilgrimage, and we can reside in that sense. But we can also reside, and we also should reside, in the sense of cultivating that spirit of Vrindavan, that spirit of the dham within us, which can be a deep meditation, right? We can evoke, even if we just close our eyes, take a few deep breaths, and just evoke the presence of Vrindavan within our hearts. Just evoke some memories. Other practices, ways that we create this force field for ourselves.
Just focusing, maybe, not to be distracted, just trying to pray and focus.
So having that kind of focused prayer. When we have that focused prayer, focused practice, and especially if we do that regularly, if we have a routine of that, what do we call that? Is a sadhana. That's what sadhana bhakti is, isn't it? Sadhana is just that regular, consistent, routine practice, right? But there's a kind of a focus, there's a kind of a dhyan already woven into it, just by the consistency, just if we can, whether we're feeling it or not. It's best if it is authentically coming from our heart, and we're authentically, some days, some mornings I sit with my beads, and I get a little glimpse, I feel authentic there, I'm excited. Yes, Krishna, I want to connect with you, I want to chant your name. Is that every morning? No. In fact, more mornings than not, I'm sitting there and I'm fighting sleepiness, or trying not to think about the things that I have to do in my day, or pressures at work. But just by sitting there in the morning, just committing, okay, I said I would do this, I have faith that it's a process. I have faith that it's going to help me, and I'm just going to focus my energy. I'm building that protective covering. So sadhana, particularly in our tradition, with japa, with mantra meditation, with the chanting of Krishna's holy names through japa, is a very, very powerful way that we do that. What's another powerful way that we do that? Harikatha. Hearing Harikatha. Reading Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, reading scriptures, sacred texts, hearing the pastimes of the Lord, hearing the philosophy. Right? We're creating that force field for ourselves. Bhajan. Yeah. Right? Having a practical bhajan. And we can think of bhajan in a musical sense, but also bhajan as a very deep experience, right? When we're in our bhajan. It's a form of worship. That's what bhajan comes from bhaj, right? To worship. Anyone else? Yes. Switching off your phone. Switching off permanently. Yeah, so going along with sadhana, right? That's to recognize, and I'm really glad, I was poking a little fun, but I'm really glad you mentioned that because, right, we can, sometimes we think of building this force field, and if we're honest with ourselves, there are things that make it easier to build that force field and harder to build that force field. If we can commit to just turning off the phone, or I know some people have a practice, I've had it before, I can't say I'm honestly doing it now, but I'd like to get back to it, is I don't look at my, when I had this practice, I wouldn't look at my phone until done with my rounds, showered, done puja, whatever, right? Whatever the thing is. But just not turning to that phone first thing in the morning, that itself can be a game changer. And I'm not gonna ask anyone to confess, but so many of us struggle, right? It's become almost like a collective thing that we just reach for our phones like first thing in the morning. I saw someone had made some kind of like little reel on social media. Maybe you've seen this about like, what if with the same enthusiasm we reach for our phone, we reach for our Bhagavad Gita. You seen that? Yeah. But it's such a good point. When we make those conscious decisions to turn off my phone, at least for the time being of my sadhana, to prioritize my sadhana, we're creating that force field, right? So creating a windless place. Our sadhana, especially our japa, our Bhagavad Shravana, our Harikatha,